it start for a wee film about James Scott Skinner, or James Skinner as he was christened, because that's where he was born. Played on one of his own fiddles. He had a number of fiddles actually over the years, but this is just one of them. And this is a fiddle that's in the care of the Banchory Heritage Society. So it's a bonny instrument, lovely to play even in this cool room here. So yeah, the life and music of James Scott Skinner, the Strathspey King. So this might be quite a long video because he did a lot, there's a lot of stuff about him and he wrote a lot of music. So I can only just scratch the surface, but we'll give you a flavour of that. So Bonnie Banchory, James was born in Banchory on the 5th of August 1843. His father, William Skinner, had been a gardener, but when James came along, he was actually a dancing master. His mother was Mary Agnew, and she came from Strathspey. They were a modest but happy family, a musical family. And Skinner would later say that he was born with more feet than stockings, which is to say that they were a bit hard up. He would also say that he was born with a pen in his ear and a fiddlestick in his hand, which is to say he was fairly thought he was naturally gifted in the musical sense when it comes to composing and playing. William, as I said, he'd been a gardener, but there was an accident at a rural wedding in Aberdeenshire, and what happened at the time was only weddings would be conducted in the house rather than the kirk. The minister would come round, and after the service and the ceremony was done with, the men would argue out and they would discharge their weapons, so pistols and muskets, that type of thing. William's gun, the barrel exploded in his hand, and it took 3 fingers for his left hand, meaning that he had to give up the job as a gardener. He wasn't able to do that, so he healed up. He devised a means of strapping the bow to his left hand, and he taught himself to play left-handed, and became a dancing master. So he was now a man that was easily held up. He unfortunately died when James was only 18 months old, so he never really kent his feather, but I think the music in the house would certainly have made an impression. His older brother Sandy was also a fiddle player, so there was definitely music in the house, and James would actually receive his first lesson from Sandy when he was 6 years old, and thereafter would develop a deep love for the music of his native land. He would also learn to accompany the fiddle on the cello, and the cello from way back at Neil Gow's time was the accepted means of accompanying the fiddle for dancing. So he would learn to kind of vamp a bit of rhythm and harmony to the fiddle music. He would soon accompany Sandy at barn dances around about Deeside, and then Sandy would introduce him to a friend of his, a man called Peter Milne. His name he was also known as the Tarland Minstrel, and he's easily the best Kent fiddler in Tarland and Deeside at the time. One of my ancestors actually, so I'm quite proud of that. But Peter would take on James as a student. He would be a tutor and mentor to James, and James would later say that he was almost like a father figure to him. He certainly would look up to him, and he took him on as an apprentice as well. So the young James, for 5 shillings a month, would accompany Peter at country dances. Didn't matter how many there was, it was 5 shillings a month. So these would be up Deeside and down Strathdown, and some nights he would be practically falling asleep at the door. He'd be so tired when he got back. He would later say of Peter that he was practically a father to me, and he would describe Peter as one of the grandest Strathspey players that ever graced Scotland, and probably the finest native musician of any country in the world. He was a genius and a great preserver of the finest of the old Scottish melodies. So here's something by Peter. This is a slow Strathspey called James O. Forbes, of course. was this going into John McNeill here. That's Peter's best Kent tune, and you hear that all over the place, but truly great fiddle tune, John McNeill. Well, anyway, that was Peter. Sad end to Peter, actually. He was buried in a pauper's grave in the Nellfield Cemetery in Aberdeen after being bedridden for the last 10 years of his life. I mean, he was a man who he led orchestras and played for dances all over Scotland. He played as far afield as Manchester. He got rheumatism, and it was suggested that opium would be the thing to ease up the symptoms of that. And of course, he became an opium addict. You could buy it in a chemist's shop at the time. So kind of went into a downward spiral, really. So he was in a great life, and he was back in Aberdeen, but really tragic way to end up. He has a very fine memorial stone in the square in Tarland, and that was raised by public subscription. And while I had my post at the Elphinstone Institute, I actually put in a fair bit of time to try and find where his actual grave was. Being a pauper's grave, there was no marker stone, so tracked it down. We had a fundraising concert, we got permission, and we had a memorial stone erected on the site of his grave. That grave has 12 other folk in it, 5 of which were bairns, infants, and Peter was the second last body interred in that grave. So kind of sad end to one of our great fiddlers, but anyway, that was Peter, a great influence in the young Skinner. So a wee while later, James was biding with his sister Annie in Aberdeen, and his brother Sandy took him along to a concert at the Aberdeen Music Hall to see a concert by Dr. Mark's Little Men, which was a juvenile orchestra. James at this time, he was a dancing master under the patronage of Sir Charles Forbes and Yow. So the wee group of these, James and his tour had gone along to the concert, and Sandy had been keeping an eye on James, who was absolutely transfixed by the whole thing. And he turned to him at one point, he says, "Would you like to go with him, Jimmy?" And he replied, "Yes." My heart was throbbing with anticipation, which I think is a great sign of how excited he was about music in general. He was taken for an interview through in the green room of the Aberdeen Music Hall, and he had an interview with Dr. Mark. And then thereafter began a 6-year apprenticeship, which would see him performing all over Britain, 600 different venues by the time he was 16. He had to perform in a kilt, however, being Scottish, it was a bit of a novelty, and it meant that he kind of stood out a bit, and he wasn't initially very well liked by some of the other boys who were a bit jealous of him. Some of the loons would call him porridge legs and stick pins in his legs, which he didn't like, and he got into fights, and on one occasion he leathered the boy so badly that he got whipped and then sent back to headquarters in Manchester. At this point, he was taken under the wing of a violinist called Charles Rougier. He was the main string tutor. He was lead violinist with the Halley Orchestra and a graduate of the Paris Conservatoire, so a great player, and had a great influence on Skinner. He discovered fairly quickly that James couldn't read music. He was marking on, he was pretending. And what he would do is he would listen to the teacher and he could play it back. So he had a fantastic ear, but he couldn't actually read the music if he didn't hear it first. So Rougier put that right. He taught him how to read music, taught him the advanced theory, the rudiments of music, and turned him into a formidable violinist, as well as a great traditional player. He could play all the classical stuff for Bye. So some of his stuff's technically very, very advanced, but this is one I'm going to play, just to give you a wee taster. This is Back to the Hills. So you've got a taste of a wee kind of heavy, slow air, but then it goes into the variations. not my fiddle this, but I'm now want to go and start recording this again, so we mistakes might stick. So anyway, back to the hills. Skinner wrote a lot of quite demanding stuff, because I mean he ultimately became a concert violinist. He gave up being a dancing master, which he was when I got to it, but he became a dancing master and dedicated himself to concert stage, and he would write stuff like that just to entertain the audience and show off how good he was. I think stuff like The President. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but it's very, very demanding. Quite enough of that. That's only about halfway through, but it goes up. There's double stopping and things like left-handed pizzicato and things. Some of these tunes like Madame Neruda, they use pizzicato bowing. You know, that sort of stuff. So you get the idea. Technically very, very advanced, and he's got Charles Rouget to thank for that. So back to Dr. Mark. He'd eventually become extremely homesick and just wanted to get back to Aberdeenshire. While we were performing in Aberdeen, he actually absconded. He went AWOL. He went absent without leave, never to return. So a wee while later, he met up with Peter Milne and had a discussion about what he would do for a career, and he thought he'd quite like to be a dancing master. And a short time later, Peter introduced him to Professor William Scott. Now he had had a knowledge in regards training up somebody to be a dancing master, and he would train James to be a dancing master, and they would be one of the best known in the country, to be honest. He was something of an inspiration to the young man, to the point that James would thereafter call himself James Scott Skinner, in honour of Professor William Scott. So that's for it. You often hear him just called Scott Skinner, but that was the name he took for himself. In his late teens, Skinner would compose one of his first tunes, and this is a Strathspey called The Miller Hymn, so I'm going to play that for you. This is what he said about it. Really at the end of his life, as part of his memoirs, he said, modestly, the Miller O'Hearn is not only my best Strathspey, but the best of all Strathspeys. What an ego here. So I'll play that and follow up with the old wheel. The young Skinner, when he was alone, used to visit the mill at the Miller Hymn. Johnston the Miller was actually well, he was kind of related because Skinner's grandfather and Johnson were married to sisters, so they were kind of like family. And the young Skinner, kind of fatherless at this point, was taken under the wing of the Miller Johnson for the Miller Hymn, and that's for the left-handed fiddler is named after, because he lost fingers in the mill workings. and learnt to play left-handed. So anyway, this is the Miller of Hearn in honour of Johnson, and then the Auld Wheel, which is about the mill at the Mill of Hearn. So there you go. So Skinner had become a composer. This is something that would really accompany him his entire life. He's as well known as a composer as a player now. He wasn't backward at coming forward, that's for sure. I think he's certainly convinced of his own genius. He famously put in the front cover of the Scottish Violinist, which is a collection that every self-respecting Scottish fiddler should have. It said, "Talent does what it can, genius does what it must." A wee bit of insight. He also felt, however, that one of his compositions were just pot boilers, so I suppose they were okay, but they weren't great. They were just tunes. That said, he also thought his finest work would stand the test of time, and in this I think he was proved correct. I certainly would agree with that. He began to find acclaim as a fiddle and dancing champion at contests up around the country. He even competed in Dublin, actually, and he began his own dance classes and performed with theatre or orchestras. And that's the thing. In this earlier part in his life, he, as a musician, he'd be just as likely to be seen in like the teal coat and the bow tie, white kind of wing collar, that type of thing, evening wear, as famously now folk think of him in his kilt at every occasion. But at that part in his life, he was wearing, it was typical for a concert musician to wear at the time. So he was playing with theatre orchestras just wherever he could get work. He would talk. It's a bit. I have to say, I see a lot of that in myself, because that's like me every day. When I play at all folks' home, play at Tivoli, play the pub, kind of anywhere for there's work. So anyway, by 1860, he was on a successful dance class in Ballater, and it was there that he came to the attention of Queen Victoria at nearby Balmoral. She'd requested a demonstration of Highland dancing for her tenants' children at Balmoral, and was most put out to find that they didn't ken any dances. So she had turned to her factor. Is there not a dancing master anywhere in the neighbourhood? And the reply was, yes, Your Majesty, there's one at Ballater named Scott Skinner. And she then replied, well, give him every encouragement to come here. So Queen Victoria had instructed that they should get Skinner to teach the tenants at Balmoral. And that's where he fell in with the royal family. And there's quite a few tunes dedicated to kind of various aspects of that, but here's one. This is called the Queen's Welcome to Invercalled. First march I ever was taught by my main tutor Dougie Lawrence, my school teacher Andy Linklater, right up to when I did my hires. I had Angus Shaw for a while in Bankery, but biggest influence would have been Dougie Lawrence, and this is the first thing he taught me. typical of the James Scott Skinner march type kind of theme and variations. Better Kent would be Balmoral Castle. After that, but we'll stop there. I'm going to hate to tune this fiddle up just in a minute. Queen Victoria, she famously had a great love of the Highlands and the culture of the Highlands, although admittedly it was quite a rose-tinted view of the Highlands. Naobdi lived in this kind of Highland idyll that she inhabited, but it meant there was a huge popularity in Highland culture right across, not just Scotland and Britain, but across the world really. And she regularly hosted balls at Balmoral Castle. A local fiddler, Crathy Willie Blair, usually played for the dances, and he was in good terms with James Scott Skinner. So at one occasion, James attended a ball at the castle when John Brown, the famous attendant of Queen Victoria, and Prince Albert actually was acted as like a gillie when they were up on the hill, the deer stalking and stuff. So John Brown, he pushed Skinner up near the Queen and in a loud voice exclaimed, "Now Skinner, you're in the right quarter now, shaka fit man, shaka fit," as in, now's your chance to impress the Queen. So he wrote a tune for John Brown, nae that well kent. I've heard many folk playing this, but it's a great tune. John Brown. A very good version of John Brown, but I'll just say the Carl's hands are getting a wee bit Carl, but a great tune. I think probably with some of these tunes they're not found in any other collections other than Skinner's own collections, and some of them are quite hard to get, but it's a cracking tune anyway. If anybody wants some music, give me a shout and we'll get it for you. So John Brown, Skinner would later compose Our Highland Queen for Victoria, and a handwritten manuscript was said to have been incorporated into a fire screen at Balmoral Castle. So this is Our Highland Queen, and then I'm going to pause it and tune the fiddle up. note. I'm going to pause it just for a second when I get tuned up. Back again. So, James Scott Skinner, he had his first tune published when he was just 17, but he would go on to compose over 600 pieces. He was kind of fanatical about getting his music out to the public domain, and he would have these kind of like just sheet music published regularly, and that's part of the problem was frequently in financial difficulties. He was ploughing money back into getting his music published. So as well as these kind of publications, he'd quite a few larger, well, proper big collections, and here are the main ones. The Ettrick Vale Quadrilles, the Miller Ahern collection, the Elgin collection, the Logie collection, the Beauties of the Ballroom, a Guide to Fashionable Dancing, a Guide to Bowing, the Scottish Violinist, the Harp and Claymore, and the People's Ballroom Guide. So a lot of material. I mean, some of these collections I've not seen, which is probably why there's some of this stuff I can't find. But anyway, that's James Scott Skinner and his compositions. He was married to his first wife in 1871. Her name was Jane Stewart, and she came from Aberlour in Strathspey. Later that year, their daughter Jeannie was born, and then their son Manson would follow in 1881. Eventually, the Bairns would be part of his concert party, and they would dance, and Manson certainly would play the fiddle. He would ultimately emigrate to Australia, and during World War I, he would be fighting with the Anzac forces, the Australian and New Zealand forces that were across fighting, notably at Gallipoli. Terrible affair that was. But anyway, now Skinner's wife, I'm pretty sure they had a lot of happy times, but ultimately life with him became really quite difficult. By 1884 he was bankrupt, and that may have led to Jean's mental breakdown, which led to her being admitted to the Elgin mental asylum, suffering from what was described as nervous exhaustion. She would never recover, and she died there in 1899. Skinner, by no stretch of imagination, was a perfect character. I mean, a flawed genius. I think you would say there was aspects of his personality wouldn't have been very well liked at this day and age, but he actually, I think he was living with his second wife while his first wife was still alive, so that's not very cool. Anyway, at this point, back to his music, James was touring extensively, and his concerts were receiving critical acclaim. One review in the Aberdeen Journal said, "Surely Mr. Skinner is the king of Strathspey players," and he would thereafter style and promote himself as a Strathspey king. He thought it fitted him perfectly well, and they still call him the Strathspey king to this day, and I certainly do. So, in 1893, Skinner agreed to take part in a tour in North America. So we're rattling through the years a wee bit. I'm going to look for some music here, because it's not a tune I can. It's just coming up in a minute. He was asked to take part in a tour in North America with the famous piper Willie McLennan, whom he'd met on the Highland Games circuit. He also knew for that circuit the legendary athlete Donald Dinnie, certainly at that time the world's greatest athlete. All the heavy events at the games, the caber, shot put, hammer, all that sort of stuff, but he also did the high jump and the races when he was younger, and then he would also do weightlifting competitively and wrestling as well, and he competed and defeated the champions of the USA and Australia at various points. So anyway, Donald Dinnie, different story. The tour was actually a complete financial disaster, despite being a great critical success. It wasn't helped by the death of McLennan from meningitis, and it meant that things were so bad for him that the remaining artists on the tour had to rely on help from admirers in Canada and the US to get them back home. So things were desperately bad. at that point. But on his return, he resolved to give up dancing. He'd seen how well the solo fiddling went down, and he gave up the dancing and dedicated himself to be a concert violinist. Prior to this, he frequently performed in evening dress, but for this time forward, it would be full Highland dress, and that's the image that folk know of him to this day. So this is a tune I was looking for the music for. It's not played guitar really that I can, but I'm going to play it for you. This is Willie McLennan, dedicated to Willie, the organiser of that famous tour that went all wrong. I think what happened was the agents and venues nicked all the money. That's basically what happened. Some things never change. Variations. It's not a tune I can, but you get the gist of it. By now, Skinner was renowned as a performer, and he'd played over Britain as an adult, including Dublin and Belfast, as well as the villages and rural halls of Scotland. He was also performing at concert halls like the London Palladium and the Royal Albert Hall. By the late Victorian period, he was certainly one of the best known entertainers in Britain, meeting the likes of Charles Dickens, the Prime Minister Gladstone, and performing in Sir Harry Lauder's concert party. He was the first Scot, and possibly the world's first violinist to be recorded. They've got the records in the USA for the technology was invented, but no wax cylinders. But he's certainly the first Scot to commercially record music. And some of that recordings can still be found. I've got a few that I've come across over the years. This is not one of his tunes, but he set an arrangement of this, and it certainly was one of his tunes that he recorded. This is an old Strathspey and Arthur Bros, but typical Skinner style, he set it so that it's a bit more technically demanding. This goes up into third position. Gladstone, named after one of the famous prime ministers of the Victorian period. I suppose Palmerston would have been one of the other famous scenes, and probably most famous would be Benjamin Disraeli, but anyway, Gladstone was certainly one of them. Far away now, up to 1925. By this point, he was invited to attend the World Fiddle Championships in the USA. On his journey to America, the ship's band performed his best known pieces, and upon arrival in Boston, he was met by St Andrews Societies, Caledonian Associations, Clan Societies, tartan, saltires, clan flags, and brass and pipe bands. He was thereafter escorted to a civic reception in the Bellevue Hotel, travelling in a white and gold motor coach. Quite remarkable. By this point, he's had his portrait painted, and it's you can see one. It's the McEwen Galleries in Dundee, probably the most famous one. And he's a household name, Skinner, by this point. But back to the contest, it took place in Lewiston, Maine, and he was met to his horror by a jazz band. Now, some of you might think that's a bit harsh, but he didn't like jazz, that is for sure. And he thereafter discovered that Strathspeys, which would have been his strong suit, I suppose to his mind, were banned, and only jigs and reels could be played. So this is putting him in a bit of a tight spot at the minute, because it's not really his thing. Reels aye, but jigs not so much so. The contest was an absolute disaster for Skinner. The provided pianist couldn't get the hang of playing with him, played in the wrong time, couldn't keep time nor regard rhythm. Folk talked through his performance, and while others laughed, so it was all going pretty badly wrong for him. So the last time he had a go at it, he started up again, all went pear-shaped again. He stopped playing midway through, he bowed, and he walked off. And that would be the last time he would ever perform publicly. So, pretty tragic, really. His autobiography was published in the People's Journal near the end of his life in 12 instalments, and they give a real insight into his personality, because it's basically him writing about himself, and you're not really left with much doubt that he really felt himself as significant and somebody that would be remembered, that had made an impression with his music. He certainly brought fiddle music in Scotland to a greater popularity than it had ever had or has ever had since. So you can he's somebody that's definitely worth remembering from that point of view. Right man at the right time. So a lot to thanks old James Scott Skinner for. Hence the reason we're raising money to erect a statue, life-size bronze, which will be very much in the style he liked to be seen, in the full Highland dress, and that will be in Scott Skinner Square in Bankery, hopefully in 2027, on the anniversary of his death. He died on the 17th of March 1927, and thousands of people lined the streets of Aberdeen for his funeral. And as his coffin passed by, it was escorted by the Aberdeen Police Pipe Band, and Pipe Major George S. McLennan, finest piper of the day, piped at the graveside. He's buried in the Allenvale Cemetery in Aberdeen, which is marked by a handsome memorial stone, which replaced actually the original one, which was seen as being really a bit too modest, but it was Skinner could afford, to be honest, at the time. So a new stone was erected by public subscription. Sir Harry Lauder, who was chief mourner at the funeral, actually put up a fair bit of money himself, and fits there now as an extremely handsome memorial stone. It's got a life-size bust of Skinner, and it's got some writing on it, and the music to the Bonnie Lass a Bon Accord. So a fitting marker to one of our great players, James Scott Skinner, the Strathspey King. So I should play a set of his tunes just to finish. It's nice to finish with some of his better Kent tunes rather than the kind of showy ones. These are certainly some of the best known. Hector a Hero for Sir Hector MacDonald, Fighting Mark. The Laird of Drumblair, that's William McCarty, made his money in engineering and iron, and great fun of Skinner, gave him a cottage rent free for a while, and then the Hurricane to finish. What's the Life and Music of James Scott Skinner. There's so many more tunes I could have played. I mean, I could have gone on for hours and hours, and there's a lot of details you have to skip over. Yeah, he liked writing stuff about kind of historic figures and events in folky Kent and places in the landscape. It's much the same sort of thing as I like to write about myself. Let's think. Ossian. Now, Ossian is a legendary Fenian warrior poet dating back to something like the 3rd century or something like that. The son of Fingal, and they were a warrior band that hunted in the hills and fought invaders to Scotland, and a big part of Highland culture were kind of this Fianna poems. James Macpherson famously had published post 1746, and they were hugely influential, hugely popular. Folk like Napoleon carried them. Thomas Jefferson apparently wanted to learn Gaelic so he could read them in the original. But there was a fair bit of controversy as to their authenticity, but they were very influential. So Skinner wrote a tune called Ossian, and the title goes along with that because there is a joy in grief, because there are pretty dark and heroic acts, but then kind of Abdi's deed at the end of it. You can, Ossian's old and blind and he's the only that's left. So Ossian's a great tune, but it's tapping into that Hale mythology and kind of the mist in the hills and the wind blowing and stuff like that. But it's a great bit of music. Big, heavy tune. I suppose in the same vein as something like the Valley of Silence, or the Weeping Birches of Kilmorick, or Fyvie Castle, kind of big tunes take a lot to play. But if you contrast that with things like the Cradle Song, which is just a very simple cradle song, trying to get a baby to sleep. Kind of could cover all the different moods. The Ossianic poetry that Macpherson translated. I mean, it's just kind of a taste of it. These are for the fragments, so there's a chance that they're actually more authentic. There's, I think, a fair sense that he started writing stuff and providing for the demand. Maybe no, but I think the older stuff, there's a fair chance there might be authentic stuff in it, but the translation, it's better than the original if you can, but by the side of a rock on the hill, beneath the aged trees, old Ossian sat on the moss, the last of the race of Fingal. Sightless are his eyes, his beard waves in the wind. Dull through the leafless trees he heard the voice of the north. Sorrow revived in his soul, and he lamented the dead. Gives you a bit of a taste of it. And another fragment. If I fall in the field, raise high my grave. Grey stones and heaped up earth shall mark me to future times. When the hunter shall sit by the mound and produce his food at noon, some warrior rests here, he'll say, and my fame shall live in his praise. Remember me when low on earth I lie. So there you go. I think Skinner's kind of tapped into that quite well, that sort of feel. So anyway, I'm maybe finished with Tulloch Gorham, which he certainly didn't write, but he wrote the variations. And it gives you a sense of how his team, the kind of most Scottish sounding tune you could get, the quintessential Highland Strathspey, from Strathspey, Tulloch Gorham, means a blue-green hill. And it's sited about midway between Granton and Spey and Aviemore. There's a ferm there. I think there's it'd be a burial mound, but it's kind of known as a fairy mound, I think. But the place looks across the River Spey towards the Cairngorms. You can see Cairngorm itself across the river, so it's a great spot. So Tulloch Gorham with Skinner's variations, you can see how he's tried to develop it and turn it into a concert piece. Just tune this. That's why I like adjusters. Makes this kind of thing really easy to do. Right, let's try it. If I can get through this without stopping to tune it, it'll be a miracle. Get the end here, nothing's going wrong. This fiddle's actually a littler than mine fiddle, that's why the shoulder rests on the bide on. Right, let's give it a go. again. On that note, I think that's quite enough of that. The fiddle's about as cold as I am. So anyway, the life and music of James Scott Skinner, the Strathspey King, played on one of his own fiddles, which is in the care of the Bankery Heritage Society. All the best.